Well, if you didn't know this now, you heard it here first. AS9100 becomes IA9100 in 2026. What changes? When do you have to comply? And how do you prep without blowing up your QMS? Today, we're going to start cutting through the noise with Mike Varney. By the end of this episode, you'll have a better idea of what to expect from the upcoming revision of AS9100 and know what you need to start looking out and preparing for. Welcome to the QCast. I'm Christian Reyes, your host. Joining me today is Mike Varney, president of Mike Varney Quality Management Solutions, or MVQMS, where he helps businesses develop and perfect quality management systems. With over 15 years of experience in the metals industry, Mike now guides companies through certifications, namely ISO9001 and AS9100, focusing on practical solutions that drive compliance and operational excellence. I first met Mike a number of years ago, actually, through a mutual client, and I've seen firsthand the great work that he does helping aerospace companies implement and maintain QMS programs across supply chains. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity and thanks for the kind words.
Of course. I'm excited for today. We always have good conversations. And again, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I know that you're super busy. Your services are very much in high demand. And not to mention the fact that we've got a new revision of AS9100 coming out supposedly next year. But let's make clear to listeners right from the top that everything that we're going to talk about, everything today is speculation, right? It's technically still up in the air until the final version of the new revision is released. And even that date is technically still up in the air. It's not yet known. We expect it next year, but it's not 100%. But with that being said, it's obviously good to stay ahead of what's coming down the pipeline and better to be aware of any upcoming changes than kind of get caught off guard by them after the fact. But that being said, let's get into it and kind of start off with some of the basics and timeline. Do you have any idea why is AS9100 changing to IA9100? What does the IA in the name change reflect?
So that's a great question. Initially, everybody expected that the next one we would see, whenever that would be, was going to be an AS9100E. Because that's kind of the nomenclature it's followed since the beginning. But if anybody is familiar with other standards, the vast majority of them start with I, and that implies international standard. And the aerospace standard is kind of the only one that has avoided that, even though it's very much an international industry. So they're transitioning from the AS nomenclature that we're used to an IA for international aerospace standard. But they're going to keep the 9100. As far as what the revision number or letter will be, assuming it's going to be a dash, but that's still speculatory. But basically, it's to imply the international side of the industry.
That makes sense. Now, we expect it out in 2026, correct? As of the information we have today, the next version's coming out next year.
That's what we're hearing. Based on some of my contacts I've spoken to who are involved in the process, we're anticipating Q4 of 2026. There's still some factors that could skew that in either direction. I wouldn't imagine it will get moved sooner, but it could get pushed later.
Well, historically, AS9100 has been written on the ISO 9001 as a framework, and so. With that being said, or the expected publication being in 2026, typical transition windows have been about 3 years. Is that to be expected in this upcoming version, or any indicators that that's going to change?
What we're hearing so far is that the 3-year should stand. We have not heard anything to the contrary. 3 years is usually the default. The one potential hiccup there is that this is technically considered a minor revision. And there have been times with some standards in the past where minor revisions have had an accelerated transition time where we could see a potential 2-year. I'm hoping that's not the case because the certs are issued on a 3-year lifespan. So 3-year makes it nice and clean. Everybody expected it to be a major revision because it's been 10 years. Everybody expected it was going to be a big change, just like the jump from 2008 to 2015 or from Rev C to Rev D. For speaking aerospace, those changes were pretty substantial. It included full renumbering of the clause structure. It removed a lot of popular lingo that was in the older versions of the standard. But again, everything could change. There may be some stuff that we haven't seen that could still be coming down the pipeline, but we're anticipating it to be a more minor revision than the jump from AS9100C to AS9100D.
Okay. And so if 9001 2026 slips or ships on time, does that shift IA9100 schedule materially at all?
That's a good question. I think they're already running about a year behind their initial schedule. So it's definitely realistic that could potentially get pushed to 2027. As of right now, it looks like 9001 is on track for that September 26th. And then 9100 is pretty much tooled up and ready to go to implement those 9001 changes very quickly, estimating for a Q4 release. So that's what it looks like is the most likely scenario. But there is still room for 9001 to kind of derail this a little bit. The most likely scenario being that 9100 would probably wait for 9001.
Sure. At least to me, it feels cleaner that way. As I'm sure
Absolutely.
to many people throughout the industry, kind of hoping for that. But as you've said, there's no way to be sure. Of what you've heard, what are two changes that would most alter the day-to-day evidence that an auditor would expect coming in?
So that's a good question. There's a handful of things in here that are maybe not new, but are stressed much more significantly than they may have been in the past. So, for example, ethical behavior is something that was in the AS9100 standard for Rev D that is now peppered throughout this new standard in more places than it was in the past. So there's much more emphasis on ethical behavior. Now, when you talk ethical behavior, that's largely subjective. So when we talk about how that might be audited or the things an auditor might want to see when it pertains to something like ethical behavior is your training records, right? They may go out there and they may talk to people and say, hey, prove to me that we have some awareness, right? Let's ask people some questions. Hey, in the event of this situation, how would you handle it? Those are the things we expect to start seeing the auditors do to production personnel or inspection personnel, people that are hands-on with product. Now, if they see something that looks suspicious, be it a potential counterfeit situation, or if there's uncontrolled documentation or customer supply documentation, sensitive information that's being used or floating around in the shop, an auditor may take that opportunity to kind of role play with someone in production to make sure that they have a good grasp on what the ethical way to proceed might be. That's just an example. We also see more mention of MSA, measurement systems analysis. We see more mention of APQP. We see more mention of control plans. Now, none of these words are new to people in aerospace. AS13100, which has been out for several years now, focuses on all of these things. A lot of the flow down from the OEMs focus on a lot of these things. It's just now, opposed to being just customer specific for one product line or to satisfy one customer, this is now has to become organic in your system across the board, right? We can't just pick and choose and say, well, we're going to do MSA for this situation, but doesn't apply to these ones. That's less of the case.
Those are some pretty sweeping changes just in terms of, putting it at a system level, embedding it at a system level. I mean, across the organization, those are some changes that have, sweeping effects. Like you said, I mean, it's probably going to take some effort from top management levels all the way down to, shop floor personnel in terms of, being prepared for what's coming down the pipeline, when an auditor comes in.
Absolutely. And the best thing that anybody can do as it pertains to any of this stuff is to educate yourself. There is so much good information out there. And there's a lot of good free information out there. So it's a good thing to at least start, self-educating.
So in regards to other stuff that's changing, that you've heard, one thing that I've heard some talk about is changes in regards to information security.
Yes.
Can you shed any light on that?
Yes, I'm very glad you brought this up. So information security, anybody, at least 90% of people that are in the aerospace world have been talking about CMMC, right? In the State 171 compliance. That's being flown down, by the government initially, and now through all the OEMs, and it's making its way to all of us effectively. I'm starting to see it on POs. For some of my very small clients, are starting to see it get trickle down. So this has been a talking point for the past 2, 3, maybe even 4 years. People talking about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a huge deal, right? There's been a lot of very popular, very well-known breaches, that have made it in the news that we're hearing a lot about. I feel like once a month I'm getting an email from somebody I did business with about a legal situation due to a cyber breach. It's very familiar. So this is being flown down now in the standard, which in the past there was some loose verbiage around cybersecurity, but it was mainly around the protection of information and things like that, and less about cyber itself. Cyber now is a mandatory consideration within the creation of your quality management system, and it has actually a shall statement, which is something new. That being said, how deep you go with that is at this point in time entirely up to you. meaning you develop your plan for the protection of your information technology, right? Your cyber protection based on what's appropriate to your organization. That's how it's currently worded. What that's going to look like in the future, that could tweak a little bit. I'm not really sure. Obviously, if you have requirements beyond that to your customers, that would have to supersede anything that's in the standard. So you may still have to go above and beyond that, especially if you're getting things like CMMC 2.0 flow down. But yes, we're anticipating that we're going to have to create some sort of information security program for every company that is planning to be 9100 certified going forward. I think that's going to be a mandatory. That's one I don't think we're going to be able to get out of.
That's a very big change that people need to be aware of. But it's also, it may grumble at some of the work that goes into this, but ultimately it's a good thing, right? I mean,
It is.
as you were saying, the leaks that you hear about and the, businesses that whether it's whatever email scheme is happening, it's so prevalent nowadays. It's so prevalent. Even, I mean, and this could be just me, but, in the past, I've always historically kind of chuckled at the IT trainings that we receive, the videos that you watch. It's something that personally, I don't think we can take for granted necessarily anymore. Just that knowledge. Do you have any idea what the new must-have records or artifacts are going to be for product safety? I'm talking like hazard logs or like safety risk registers. Just training?
That's a great question. Product safety has always confused people. They hear product safety, they think it has to do with the safety of the person making the product. It has to do with the safety of the handling the product. It has to realize, and the reality is it doesn't, right? Product safety, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm not promoting unsafe work environments. Product safety, as is reported in 9100, has to do with the safe operation of the completed product, ensuring that the product can be used safely, not that it's safely manufactured. Again, that should be included either way, but product safety itself actually doesn't pertain to that at all. So just that's something that's always been very confusing, but there are some additions to the new standard that pertain to product safety that we haven't seen before. Specifically in clause 813, there's a bunch of information that emphasizes this, mainly because product safety has been very confusing to companies in the past. So they added a huge note section to the end of 813, which is where product safety is talked about, that goes on and talks about some of the processes that you can implement to promote product safety. So the requirement that pertaining to product safety itself has not changed much. It just gives you a lot better information and ideas to be able to address product safety while still basically including the product safety requirement that was always there in the past. Just now we have like 8 or 10 different options that we can use to satisfy that requirement listed in the note section beyond product safety, which I think is one of my favorite changes that they're making because it's going to clear up a lot of confusion that's been out there amongst people regarding product safety in how to promote it, how to prove it, how to generate good evidence that we actually have some control over product safety. That's something that's always been a real gray, weak spot for people, especially in audit environments.
For sure. And speaking of audit environments, should companies plan to time recertification to land after IA9100 publishes to combine audits?
This is a great question, and this is a complicated answer. If we stick on a 3-year time frame, that's best case scenario, because then everybody's stuff is always going to line up, because your cert already that you have is 3 years long. You have 3 years to comply with the new standard, meaning there will never be a situation in which there could be a lapse, because your 3 years can't exceed their 3 years. You know what I mean? So time frame wise, that's best case scenario. But if you guys are certified to AS9100, your cert expires, at some point in the next 3 years, you can have a registrar come in while you're still certified. It's very important. You have to do this while you're still certified to AS9100, because that cert can live for up to 3 years after the new one. While you're still certified, you can have somebody come in and do a transitionary audit where they will upgrade your certificate from AS9100 to IA9100. They'll come in and they'll do an audit specifically on the new stuff of the new standard, and there's no lapse in time, and your cert just gets upgraded. That is the best way to do it if you can do it that way. It also allows you a little bit of leniency. For example, if you're getting recertified right now, right? So you're looking at a September 5 reissue on your certificate, meaning September 2028 is when you'll expire. Anywhere in between that time frame, from when the new standard comes out until September of 2028, you can call your CB, have them come in and do a transitionary audit, and get your cert upgraded.
That is great to know. That's great to know. We've been talking about some of the changes a bit more top level, but if we drill down into like MSA, for example, where should small organizations start? I mean, you said earlier, it obviously depends on, it can be used as a verification activity. It's not necessarily a true requirement, so to speak. But yeah, for like small organizations, how would you suggest they start looking at that or evaluating MSA?
So that's a great question. And I know I said before, and you just reiterated, technically right now we don't foresee it being a mandatory requirement for everybody. However, we are trending in the direction of that rapidly becoming a industry best practice, meaning that just because it's not mandatory in the standard, it's likely going to become required by a lot of the OEMs. So we will probably see it. And if it's not in this rev, it'll probably be in the next rev. Eventually, we're all going to be at that point. So for smaller companies that aren't currently doing, a traditional MSA, measurement systems analysis, the best thing that you can do is to start with a simple gauge R&R. Let's figure out our essential tools that we're using in our inspection area for our final inspection, right? Our product acceptance instruments and the people that are taking those measurements. And let's do a really basic gauge R&R with those high level tools. Let's start there because that alone is going to tell you so much about your company. When you start to see what the variance looks like, you'll know very quickly whether you have a system that's pretty adequately staffed and adequately tooled, or if we really need to do some work. Because anything that happens at that high level is likely going to kind of be reflective of things that are downstream of it. And gauge R&Rs are very simple. They don't have to be really complicated. You can do it with a handful of people and a handful of tools. It can be an afternoon event. It doesn't have to be a major occurrence. Now, if you're going to do it on a product level, if you have a product with a bunch of very complicated dimensions, and we're talking about first article inspections and control plans and things like that, and you're doing MSA on a product level or product line level, those can get a lot bigger because now it might, instead of 3 or 4 tools, it may be 10 or 15 or 20 tools, and you may have 15 different operators and 5 different inspectors touch it. And all of a sudden, this can become a little bigger. But for companies that are looking to start out, grab a handful of tools. Later on in the process, your final inspection, your product acceptance in those inspectors that are the ones using those tools, and let's do some basic HR&R.
That's good advice. That's great advice. One last thing that I wanted to do here today was just kind of go through a lightning round of myths. These are some things that, and we won't name any names, but things that that we've heard thrown around in reference to what people are expecting in the new version next, in maybe next year, IA9100. So I guess you'll tell me whether they're myths or not. But yeah,
I will do my best.
We'll start off with, we'll need to rewrite our whole QMS. True or false?
Please, false. Please don't do that. For the sake of your consultants, for the sake of your auditors, for the sake of your internal auditors, please don't do that. This is going to be a standard that has more additions and clarifications than it is a full rewrite. What you have in place is going to be good for probably 80% or more of it. Focus on the 20%. Don't throw anything out. In the end, maybe we'll make the decision to pull a couple little things as we replace it, but please don't approach this as a full system rewrite because it's not a full standard rewrite, so it shouldn't be a full QMS rewrite.
Got it. Next, APQP is mandatory for all work.
APQP is not mandatory for all work. That is also a false. However, we should always be doing, production verification activities, but a full system APQP is not a requirement unless there's a requirement of your customer. Again, it is a great tool, but it is a very costly tool, mainly in manpower. So if it's applicable and we need to do it, absolutely, it's got to be done. But that is not a blanket requirement for all products and all processes. I don't anticipate that being something that everybody's going to have to do for everything.
Got it. CMMC level cybersecurity is now required.
Well, CMMC level requirements are not mandatory for everybody unless it is a requirement from your customer, the government. Somebody's actually legitimately flowing that down to you. Like we said before, there's great tools that are available. There's great things that you can do to make a big dent in this without going the full expensive CMMC route.
Absolutely. Alone proves process capability.
No, it does not prove that in itself. Process capability or production process validation activities. FAI is a component of that. FAI tells you that the part is good. It doesn't necessarily tell you that the process is good. It is a component to telling you that the process is good. But we need to know also what happened upstream. We need to be doing our checks and our validation at different stages before we get to an FAI event. So it's more than just an FAI. FAI is a great component. I'm not telling everybody to not do FAIs. Keep doing your FAIs. But we need to make sure that we're doing other things along the way. And there's some great notes in the new standard They give you kind of some tips and tricks to get there to do process validation, and with FAI being a component of that.
Great answer. Great answer. Lastly, we don't know when the standard is actually going to be released, and we've got 3 years till after that, so we can at least wait until 2027.
You probably shouldn't do that.
That's not a good idea.
I shouldn't do that. Probably shouldn't do that. As a consultant that handles between 40 and 50 clients, I know for a fact a chunk of mine will probably do that. No offense to any of them if they're listening, but that's an inevitable, right? It's human nature to delay these things. We're all procrastinators to some extent. Please fight that urge. Don't do that. If you want to wait to get a jump on these things until the actual final release is made public and available, I think that's okay. But please make sure as soon as that's available, you're at least familiarizing yourself. You're going to make it much easier on yourself. You're going to make it easier on your auditors, on your consultants, on your inspectors, on all of your personnel, because ultimately it's not just, the quality manager, the director of quality, or the president who's making the changes, right? These are system changes. The whole company has to be aware of it. The whole company is going to have some level of involvement. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of those things where there are some steps. Yes, we don't know the exact, verbiage and wording of the standard as it stands now, but just like what you said, 10 minutes ago, cybersecurity alone, that is definitely going to need to be addressed regardless. And as you said, there are some simple things that you can start doing now that are relatively painless. So the amount of effort that you're putting in at it now on the front end, that will definitely pay off, likely compound any efforts that you put in at this point in time. Instead of waiting on the back end, it's going to be a lot more costly financially, time-wise. Because like you said, even though this is a minor revision, so to speak, and there aren't necessarily drastic sweeping changes that we know of yet, they are, like you said, they're process, they're system level. It's not just one person, not the quality manager that's going to have to update 10 SOPs and we're good to go. There are processes and system level things that can't change overnight. So the earlier you start looking at things like this, the better, for sure. As I'm sure you all well know, but like you said, humans, we procrastinate,
We do. We do. We tend to do that. And another thing to keep in mind too, without going too far down this potential rabbit hole, you're also a little bit at the mercy of the CBs here too, right? You got to remember that they now have to retrain their entire staff. They have to roll out programs that are new. So there's going to be a period of time, especially at the beginning, where it's probably going to be really hard to find a CB that's going to certify you a week after the standard comes out, right? And the longer you wait, the more people you're going to run up against that are going to, be looking for time to get an audit done. So the earlier you start working on these things, the earlier that you might be able to get somebody in to help you do it before that crunch at the end, where everybody's trying to do it in the last second before that 3-year deadline, because that can also be costly, and it can be very tough, and challenging for your company, for your CB, for everybody involved. So
Fantastic. Well, that takes us about right up on our time here, Mike. That's really good timing on both of our parts. But thank you again. I just want to say thank you. You dropped some gems here today, and I really appreciate it. I know that the team here does, and all of our listeners do as well. And for our listeners, where can folks find you and connect with you, find your company, if they would like to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is mvarneyqms, my first initial last name, mvarneyqms.com. All my contact information's on there. I'm very active on LinkedIn under Mike Varney. I'm pretty easy to find if you want to find me. Happy to chat with anybody. But yeah, absolutely. I tend to post a decent amount of stuff regarding these topics as well. I'll be trying to keep my client base updated. So feel free to reach out. Feel free to give me a follow on LinkedIn, connect with me, and shoot me an email through the link on my website. Be happy to chat, and you guys can learn a little bit more about me and some of the things that I might be able to offer and help with.
Absolutely. And we'll put that all in the show notes. We'll put Mike's LinkedIn. Definitely reach out to him on LinkedIn. We'll put the website there as well, so you can just click on through. So again, check the show notes. And if you found this episode as helpful as I did, please share it with a colleague, share it with someone at your work. Like, comment, subscribe to the QCast, and we're going to keep them coming. So until next time, stay compliant.